Sign it, Mom. Just sign it. My son-in-law slid the papers across the kitchen table with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. My granddaughter grabbed my wrist under the table. Not hard, just a gentle squeeze. 2 small pulses, our old signal from when she was little. It meant wait. I taught her that signal myself, 20 years ago when she was 4 and we played cards together on Sunday afternoons. I never imagined she'd use it to save me. Let me back up. My name is Helen Marsh and I am 68 years old. I own 3 rental properties in Clarksville, Tennessee. Nothing flashy, nothing that would make a magazine cover, but enough. Enough that I sleep well at night. Enough that when my husband Robert passed 5 years ago, I didn't have to depend on anyone. I built that myself. One saved paycheck at a time, one repainted bathroom at a time, one difficult conversation with a late tenant at a time. Robert and I built it together, honestly, slowly, the way you build anything that lasts. My daughter Sandra is 41. She married Derek Holloway 12 years ago. I want to be fair when I describe Derek, because fairness matters to me. It always has. He is not a stupid man. That is precisely the problem. Stupid men make mistakes you can see coming. Derek's kind of smart made him dangerous in ways I didn't fully understand until it was almost too late. Their daughter Nora is 19. She goes to Austin Peay State University, studies nursing, works part-time at the hospital on weekends. She has Robert's eyes and my stubbornness, and I mean both of those things as the highest compliments I can offer a person. The trouble started in February, the coldest one we'd had in years. Sandra called on a Tuesday evening while I was doing the books for my rental properties, checking repair invoices, reconciling bank statements, the ordinary unglamorous work that nobody sees but that keeps everything running. She asked if she and Derek could come over Saturday morning. She said Derek had something important he wanted to discuss with me. Just family, she said. Nothing formal. I said, of course. I should have recognized the pattern then. Sandra never called ahead for ordinary visits. She just showed up the way daughters do. The fact that she was scheduling it meant someone had told her to schedule it. They arrived at 9 on the dot. Sandra brought coffee cake from the bakery on Riverside Drive, my favorite, the one with the lemon glaze. Derek carried a slim leather folder. He set it on my kitchen table before he even sat down, which told me he'd been thinking about that gesture, the placement of that folder, longer than I'd like to know. Derek had a plan. He always had a plan. He wanted to form a family LLC. He explained it calmly, using words like estate planning and tax efficiency and protecting the assets for the next generation. The structure he proposed would roll all 3 of my properties into a limited liability company, with me listed as a minority partner and Derek as the managing member. He had reasons for everything: tax reasons, liability reasons. The way he talked about it, refusing sounded not just foolish, but actively irresponsible, like I'd be choosing chaos over order, emotion over logic. Sandra nodded along to everything he said. She didn't add much. She didn't need to. Her nodding was the performance. I told him I'd think about it. Derek's smile stayed in place, but something behind his eyes went still. He said the offer from his accountant. He had an accountant involved already, apparently, was only available through the end of the month. A window. A deadline. The same pressure I'd heard before in every bad deal I'd ever almost made. Good opportunities don't expire in 3 weeks. Steams do. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table with the coffee cake in my thoughts. Sandra had barely spoken during the whole visit. She used to argue with me, back when she was younger, about curfews, about boys, about the color I painted the kitchen. She had opinions and she shared them. The woman who'd sat across from me that morning was something different. Quieter, managed. I called my neighbor Joyce the next day. Joyce is 72, retired schoolteacher, sharp as a tack, and she has no patience whatsoever for anything she suspects is nonsense. I've trusted her judgment since we met at a neighborhood association meeting in 2009. Joyce listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which meant she was taking it seriously. "Helen," she said when I finished, "get a lawyer before you sign a single thing." I'd already been thinking that. But sometimes you need someone you trust to say the words out loud. That Friday I called Marcus Webb, a real estate attorney I'd worked with when I bought my 3rd property back in 2018. I explained the proposal. I heard him go quiet in a particular way. Not confused, but careful. He said he'd need to review the documents before he could say anything definitive. but that the structure Derek was describing was not, in his experience, something that benefited the person already holding the assets. It benefited the person who wanted access to them. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday and didn't tell Sandra. The weekend passed. Sunday evening, Nora drove up from campus to have dinner with me, the way she did most Sundays when her schedule allowed. We made chicken and dumplings, Robert's mother's recipe, the one with too much butter and not enough apology about it, and ate at the kitchen table with the television off, the way we both preferred. I didn't bring up her parents. I wanted the evening to just be what it was. But halfway through dinner, Nora put down her fork and looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the look she got when she was holding something she didn't know how to hand over. "Grandma," she said, "have you talked to a lawyer yet?" I looked at her. "About what?" She looked at her plate. "About whatever Dad's been trying to get you to sign." I set down my own fork. "Tell me what you know." What she knew was more than I'd expected and less than she suspected. She'd overheard a phone call. Her father, sometime in January, talking to someone she didn't recognize. He'd used the word incompetency in a context that made no sense until it did. He'd said something about a doctor, about documentation, about how the old house in Clarksville would be easier to move once the title situation was resolved. Nora had spent 3 weeks convincing herself she'd misunderstood. She was studying nursing. She knew what incompetency proceedings meant in a legal and medical context. She didn't want to know that her father was capable of what she was beginning to suspect he was capable of. "I almost didn't say anything," she told me. She was staring at the tablecloth. I kept telling myself I was wrong. "You're not wrong," I said. She looked up. I could see she'd needed someone to tell her that. "Do not say a word to your parents about this conversation," I told her. "Not yet. Can you do that?" She nodded. She was steadier than I expected her to be. Or maybe I just kept underestimating her. The appointment with Marcus on Tuesday changed the shape of everything. He had gone through the LLC documents I'd brought him. Derek had sent a full draft via email, which I'd printed and handed over. Marcus walked me through it section by section at the conference table in his office, with the yellow legal pad and a patience I was grateful for. The structure gave Derek authority to make financial decisions on behalf of the LLC without requiring my signature above a certain threshold. It included a clause that could be triggered if I were ever deemed unable to fulfill my responsibilities as a partner, a phrase that could mean almost anything and was, in Marcus's words, about as vague as they could make it without being legally meaningless. There was also a provision allowing Derek to bring in outside investors. In practice, this meant he could refinance my properties, take out loans against them, and I would have no direct recourse. My name would still be on the LLC, my liability would remain, my control would not. "Who prepared this?" Marcus asked. I gave him the name Derek had mentioned, a law firm in Nashville I didn't recognize. Marcus typed something into his computer and looked at the screen for a moment. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," he said, "but I'll tell you that this document is not designed to protect you. It is designed to transfer your decision-making authority while keeping you legally responsible for the outcomes. That's not estate planning. That's asset capture." I sat with that phrase for a moment. Asset capture. Clean and clinical and exactly right. I asked Marcus what my options were. He gave me a list. We talked for an hour and a half. By the time I left, I had a plan that was quieter and more thorough than anything Derek had in that leather folder. The first thing I did was call the Montgomery County Clerk's office and request certified copies of all 3 property deeds. I wanted a clear record of what I owned and in what form, before anything else happened. The second thing I did was visit my primary care physician, Dr. Angela Rossi, and ask her to document my current cognitive and physical health in my medical file, explicitly, comprehensively, and dated. I explained the situation. Dr. Rossi is not a woman who wastes words, but she used a few of them that afternoon about what she thought of people who planned incompetency proceedings against healthy 68-year-old women. The documentation she prepared was thorough. The third thing I did was ask Marcus to look deeper into Derek. What he found, through a combination of public court records, business filings, and a private investigator he recommended named Frank Cawley, took about 2 weeks to come together. It was not a short list. Derek had been named in a civil suit in 2019 by a business partner in Nashville, a dispute over a construction company they'd started together, which dissolved after 18 months with one party claiming the other had forged signatures on loan documents. The case settled out of court, His current employer, a mid-sized real estate development firm in Nashville, had let him go 6 months ago. He was not, as he'd implied to me, a senior consultant. He was unemployed and had been since August. Sandra knew. She had to. They lived in the same house. The mortgage on their house in Brentwood, a house I'd helped them purchase 12 years ago by co-signing their original loan, was 4 months behind. A foreclosure notice had been filed in December. That was the real deadline. Not Derek's accountant's offer. Not any window of opportunity. Their house was going to be taken. They needed money fast. And I was the closest source they thought they could reach. I felt something go very cold and very clear inside me. I had co-signed that original mortgage as an act of love. My name was still on it, which meant if they defaulted completely, it would affect my credit, my ability to refinance my own properties, possibly my ability to borrow against them, if I ever needed to. They hadn't just targeted my assets. By waiting and saying nothing, they had made me a hostage to their situation without my knowledge. I spent a quiet evening doing the math, and then I called Marcus and told him what I'd found. He told me to come in the next morning. I did. What followed was 3 weeks of careful, deliberate work that I want to describe accurately, because the way you fight something like this matters. Marcus filed paperwork to remove my name from the Brentwood mortgage, a process that required documentation and Sandra and Derek's cooperation, which they didn't know I was pursuing yet. Frank Colley continued gathering records. I updated my will, revised my healthcare directive, and established a revocable living trust that placed all 3 properties under explicit legal protection, with Marcus's firm as trustee in the event I became incapacitated. The trust made the LLC proposal irrelevant. There was nothing left for Derek to capture. I did all of this quietly. I returned Sandra's calls. I answered Derek's emails about the LLC with short, polite responses about still reviewing the documents. I gave them no reason to accelerate whatever they were planning. Nora called me every few days. I kept her informed in general terms. She was frightened for me in a way she was trying hard not to show, and I appreciated that she was trying. Then Sandra called on a Thursday afternoon with an invitation to dinner. "Just the 3 of us," she said. Derek wanted to go over the LLC paperwork together, make sure I understood everything, answer any questions. Saturday at 6, their house in Brentwood. I said yes. I spent Friday thinking carefully about Saturday. Their house gave them the advantage of controlled environment, their space, their timing, their documents, and whatever pressure they'd decided to apply. I was walking into that deliberately, which meant I needed to be more prepared than they expected me to be. I called Frank Colley and asked him one specific question. He called me back in 2 hours with the answer. There was a notary booked for Saturday evening at 8 o'clock, a private appointment in Derek's name at their home address. Notaries don't make house calls for casual paperwork. They make house calls when someone needs documents signed and witnessed in a controlled setting, quickly, without a waiting period. They weren't planning a conversation. They were planning a conversation. They were planning a signing. I called Marcus. He was not surprised. He made 2 phone calls while I was on hold. Saturday, I dressed carefully. I brought nothing, no purse, no reading glasses, no pen. I had Marcus's number in my phone and Nora's. I had a recorder application running in my jacket pocket, which is legal in Tennessee for one-party recording. I had 40 years of patience and every reason in the world to hold on to it for 2 more hours. Sandra opened the door. She looked tired, I noticed. Not the performance tired of someone putting on a show, but genuinely worn through. The house was clean in the way a house gets when someone has been cleaning it anxiously. Fresh flowers on the dining table, good wine already open. Derek came out of the kitchen with a broad smile and a firm handshake, which he hadn't offered me in years. We sat down to dinner. The food was good. Roast chicken, green beans with almonds, bread from a bakery in Franklin. Derek kept the conversation moving, smooth and practiced. He asked about my properties, my tenants, my spring maintenance plans. He asked about my health, with the particular gentleness people use when they're building a record. I ate. I answered. I was pleasant. Nora wasn't there. She told her parents she had a shift. She didn't. She was parked 2 blocks away with her phone on, waiting. At 7:45, Derek set down his fork and said, "Mom, I think we should look at those documents tonight. I've got someone coming by to notarize just to make it official, save us another trip." "Oh," I said. "Who's coming?" He said a name I didn't catch. He was already reaching for the leather folder on the sideboard. Sandra watched me. She was looking for the moment I'd push back, I think. She'd been watching for it all evening. I let Derek lay the papers out on the table. I let him explain each page the way he'd clearly rehearsed, with the particular patience of someone who has been coached to seem unthreatening. The LLC agreement, updated from the February draft, the property transfer authorization, a document I hadn't seen before, a letter from a physician whose name I didn't recognize, describing mild cognitive concerns following a recent evaluation, an evaluation I had never had. I looked at that document for a long moment. "I don't know this doctor," I said. Derek said the name again. He said it was someone Sandra had suggested, that I'd apparently met with them a few weeks ago, that sometimes people didn't retain everything from routine appointments. Sandra was looking at the tablecloth. The doorbell rang. The notary. Derek went to answer it. I picked up my phone and sent a single text to Nora. Now, she'd already called the Brentwood Police Department non-emergency line 20 minutes earlier, as we'd arranged, to report that her grandmother was being pressured to sign fraudulent documents of this address, and that there was a forged medical document involved. The responding officer had been waiting in the neighborhood. When Nora forwarded my text, she called the officer directly. I sat at the dinner table with my hands folded. The notary, a woman in her 40s, clearly confused about the tension in the room, had barely set her bag down when there was a second knock at the door. Derek answered it. He came back to the dining room a different color than he'd left it. The officer was professional and thorough. She asked to see the documents. She asked about the physician's letter. She asked Derek when I had met with Dr. Weaver, the name on the letter, and Derek said he'd have to check. The officer asked me when I had last seen a new physician. I said I hadn't, not in the past year, and that Dr. 4A, Angela Rossi at Montgomery County Family Practice, had documented my full health assessment as recently as March 14th, and I could provide that documentation. Sandra started crying. Not the managed kind. The other kind. The officer took photographs of every document on the table. She took Derek's contact information and mine. She told Derek that the physician's letter would be forwarded to the Tennessee Department of Health and the State Bar Association, as the attorney who had drafted documents relying on it would need to answer for that. She told me I was free to go whenever I was ready. I was ready immediately. Outside, Nora was pulling up to the curb as I came down the front steps. She got out of the car and hugged me on the sidewalk, and I let her, even though I don't usually like a fuss. "I wasn't sure you'd text me," she said. "I wasn't sure either until I saw that letter." We drove back to my house in Clarksville in a quiet that felt different from tense. It felt like the quiet after something finishes. The weeks that followed were not simple. They never are. The investigation by the Tennessee Department of Health confirmed that Dr. Weaver, a real physician, a general practitioner in Nashville, had signed a letter he hadn't authored. Someone had forged his signature. The detective assigned to the case determined that an intermediary had been involved. Derek had paid for the document through a third party, a connection from his time with a construction company. That third party cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced charges. The attorney who had prepared the LLC documents, a solo practitioner in Nashville named Gary Finch, lost his bar license in November. The investigation revealed he had done similar work for 3 other clients Derek had brought him over the past 4 years. Those cases were reopened. Sandra was not charged. The evidence established that she had known the broad shape of what Derek was doing but had not participated in preparing the forged documents. I believe this is technically accurate and emotionally incomplete, but the law is not in the business of prosecuting what a person knew and chose not to stop. That is, I've decided something she will carry in her own way. Derek pled guilty to fraud and forgery charges in September, 18 months, with the possibility of early release. The Brentwood house sold in foreclosure. He and Sandra moved into an apartment in Murfreesboro. I was not involved in any of that. Marcus had my name removed from the Brentwood mortgage before the foreclosure was finalized. My credit was not affected. I want to be honest about the hardest part, because I think honesty is what makes any story worth telling. The hardest part was Sandra. She called me once, 3 weeks after that Saturday, from a number I didn't recognize. She said she was sorry. She said Derek had convinced her the LLC was legitimate and that she hadn't known about the doctor's letter until the night of the dinner when I picked it up from the table. She said she'd been afraid for months and didn't know what to do. She said she knew none of that excused anything. I listened. I told her I believed she was telling me the truth about what she knew. I told her I didn't know yet what I was going to do with that, or what our relationship looked like from here. I told her I needed time. She said she understood. We hung up. Some things don't resolve into clean endings. I've been around long enough to know that. What I do know is this. 6 months ago, I was sitting at a kitchen table that felt like the edge of something. Tonight, I'm sitting at a different kitchen table, the one in my own house. And Nora is on the couch behind me, working on a pharmacology paper, her highlighters spread across the cushions, her coffee going cold the way it always does, because she gets absorbed and forgets to drink it. She asked me last month if she could work for me this summer, help with tenant coordination, small repairs, learn the business. She said she wanted to understand how I'd built it, how it worked, what had made it last. She's got her great-grandmother's recipe box on the shelf in her dorm room, and she calls me on Sunday evenings without fail. And she is, without question, the best reason I can think of for having built anything worth protecting. I told her yes. I told her she'd start with the least glamorous job I have, which is cleaning gutters and repainting the exterior of the Maple Street duplex, and she laughed and said she'd been hoping for that. She was lying, obviously, and we both knew it, and I hired her anyway. There's a quote I used to write on the blackboard when I taught Sunday school 40 years ago. Back before the rental properties and before Robert and before any of this, the truth will come out. I wrote it because I believed it. I still do. It just doesn't always come out on its own. Sometimes you have to do some of the work yourself. I'm not sorry I did. I've been thinking about what I would say at the end of this story, and I keep coming back to something simple. The outcome wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was the result of decisions. Mine, Nora's, Derek's, Sandra's, each one made freely, each one leading exactly where it had to lead. Derek spent years making a particular kind of choice. Small ones at first, probably. A shortcut here, a misrepresentation there. The kind of thing a person talks themselves into when they're under pressure and they decide the rules don't quite apply to their situation. And then the choices got larger, because they always do. You don't forge a doctor's signature on your first try. You work up to it. Every compromise he made along the way was practice for the next one. And by the time he sat across my kitchen table with that leather folder and that prepared smile, he had convinced himself so thoroughly that what he was doing was justified that I don't think he recognized it as wrong anymore. That's the thing about slowly crossed lines. After a while, you can't see where you crossed them. Sandra's choices were different, but they were still choices. She knew enough. She chose not to act on what she knew. And that decision had its own weight, its own consequence. I don't say that with cruelty. I say it because I think it's true, and because I think Sandra knows it too. The sorry she offered me over the phone wasn't the sorry of someone who was blindsided. It was the sorry of someone who watched something happen and didn't stop it, nor made a different choice. She sat with something frightening for 3 weeks. The possibility that her father was capable of something she didn't want to believe, and she chose to say it out loud anyway. At my kitchen table over chicken and dumplings, she put down her fork and handed me something that was hard to carry. That took more courage than most people will ever have to find at 19 years old. And it mattered. It changed everything that came after. What I want to say to you, and I mean this not as a lesson but as something I genuinely believe from having lived long enough to see it play out in real time, is that integrity is not abstract. It is not a feeling or a value you hold quietly inside yourself. It is a practice. It is the accumulation of small, honest choices made when no one is watching and nothing is forcing your hand. Nora had been building that practice her whole life, and when the moment came that required it, it was already there. Derek had been building something else, and when his moment came, that was already there too. I'm 68 years old. I built 3 rental properties and a life I'm proud of by doing things the hard way, slowly, honestly, with my own hands and my husband's, and a lot of years I'll never get back. I almost lost it, not because I was careless, but because I trusted people I loved, and love made me slow to see what was right in front of me. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's what love does. But intelligence, real, clear-eyed, working intelligence, is what you reach for when love isn't enough to protect you. I reached for it. I used every practical tool I had, the lawyer, the physician, the records, the recorder in my jacket pocket, the text I sent Nora that said one word, now. I am not sorry for any of it. Nora starts work on the Maple Street duplex next month. She'll be painting exterior trim and learning how to read a lease agreement and probably complaining about the gutters. I'll be there. We'll figure it out together, the same way you figure out everything worth having, one honest day at a time.